Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly series exploring what it is to be pushing boundaries and kind of breaking rules in classical music. And I'm joined by weekly guests, people who inspire me, who are really kind of pushing those boundaries and talking to them about what drives them. Today, I am joined by guitarist Sean Shibe, one of the most foremost guitarists of his generation. Sean is committed to bringing a fresh and innovative approach to the traditional classical guitar, with experimenting with repertoire and with instruments. He is a BBC Radio 3 New Generation artist and recipient of the Young Classical Artists Trust, a Gramophone Award, a Royal Philharmonic Society Award. He's performed recitals at the Wigmore Hall, at Alte Oper Frankfurt, at the Heidelberger Frühling Festival, and festivals such as Aldeburgh and Bath Festival, as well as extensively in China. As an orchestral soloist, he's performed with the BBC Symphonies, the BBC National Scottish Orchestra, the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, and the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. He is a very exciting recording artist, having released 3 albums under the label Delphian. His most recent album, which was an all-Bach album of the Lute Suites, was actually held #1 on the UK classical charts for several weeks. And I'm really thrilled to welcome him today. Please welcome Sean Shibe. Hey, Sean.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's nice to have you on the show. I like to just begin right away by asking what your earliest introductions to music were, and whether there was a particular musical moment that sort of led you on this musical path.
Well, my father's a very passionate man, and he used to sing my sister and I to sleep with old kind of socialist coal mining songs. So that was probably my earliest experience. He was a big fan of Sun Ra and Captain Beefheart, and so there was a lot of that going around the house, sort of more avant-garde end of jazz. And we did get taken to a lot of concerts when we were younger as well. But I mean, as far as, an inspiration or an inspirational story of coming to the guitar goes, like there wasn't really a very a very inspiring story. It was really that my mum walked past a shop, there was a guitar in there, and there was also a leaflet sent home that day about a guitar club in school. So it starts as a club and then it becomes slightly more serious from there.
Okay, and so the guitar, I read that the cello was your first instrument, is that right?
It may have been, actually, yeah. Yeah.
And then you kind of gravitated to the guitar and
I think I began the guitar first. But
okay.
um, yeah, I mean, of course, the thing is with the cello, you're just you have so much commitment in terms of time to a quartet or to some kind of school orchestra as well, and then you have
Yeah.
like other things going on as well. So it was very rapid, to the degree to which the cello just took over my life, and I miss it, but it wasn't to be.
Okay. And then sort of you went through the traditional kind of training through music schools, and then I mean, what was that like for you, education-wise?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky in that in Scotland there are several national centres of excellence. That's what they're called by the Scottish Executive at the time, which means that they're essentially like specialist units that are set up as part of state schools. So all the schools that I went were totally government funded, and I went to 2 different schools. I was at the City of Edinburgh Music School, which is based inside Broughton High School, from I think like 9 until 14, and then I went to Aberdeen and boarded there as their at their state equivalent. Yeah.
Okay. You're really committed to expanding the repertoire for your instrument, and I'm wondering, would you say that you have a very kind of experimental approach to this, to that sort of exploration?
Yeah, probably relatively speaking, yeah. I mean, I don't really see myself as like truly experimental yet, although, I want to be, and I try to be, but I guess, compared to what I see a lot of when I look at like careers that have come before me and think about the kind of work that they've done, it's often been quite strictly canonical in terms of, you know, what the guitar is famous for, which is
Yeah.
largely like 19th century Spanish romantic miniature, which is very sweet and sometimes it's very good as well. But I think I'm not really attracted to that, and I think at some point in my life I will be. And I've dipped into it a little bit, but I'm attracted by other things, hopefully that, you know, can sum up what I feel that I go through in contemporary life. You know, like when you have Trump and Brexit and the Nazis are back and like, you know, the world is burning, you kind of feel that, you know, Tarrega tremolo etudes might not cut it.
Yeah. Right. Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of repertoire, it's amazing how much you commission and perform new music. And I guess that's not necessarily traditional within your instrument, right? I mean, within the classical guitar, it's not so traditional to be performing such new music. What do you think about that? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are probably two characters who I'd say like that is true of, that they did do a lot of
Mm,
commissioning. And that was Segovia at the beginning of the 1900s and Julian Bream very recently, the late Julian Bream, who really was the person to commission music of like, you know, the really highest caliber of composers that he could lay his hands on. So there are people who have done essentially what I, you know, want to do and like aim to continue to do. I guess I just say that, you know, the optics are slightly different because some like the guitar is sort of quite a sellable instrument in some ways. I mean, like there's one in every house, and you know, it has this iconography associated with it, which is really powerful and very seductive from a commercial point of view. So if somebody's
mm,
willing to tap into that and have maybe a more generic career, but play music that is very, very streamable, that probably seems more visible than the really serious work, which did exist at the same time, but it ends up being, at least for the short term, overshadowed. But the serious.
mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. And you have a really amazing sense of programming. And like what I noticed is that there's almost this like narrative approach to your programming, or that there's like a real a sense of a journey. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you approach programming as a recitalist.
Wow, you're so sweet. This is all very flattering. I Yeah, look, I mean, I just want to put things together that I enjoy, you know, or that
Hmm.
I'm looking to in a concert. And I'm quite neurotic and like control freaky when it comes to like programming. I want to find something that operates on multiple levels. So like, yeah, I won't let something go until I feel that I've really made it made it work, which often involves, you know, like changing programs last minute when you realize that you've made some glaring omission. It involves a lot of arrangement, and it's probably what brought me originally well, that there were pieces or ideas that I wanted to include in programming that I realized the classical guitar was not able to demonstrate. And so like switching instruments can be sort of a solution to this question posed by programming.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious about what it feels like when you're transcribing something for your instrument. So, for example, your recent album, the Bach album for lute, originally, like what is the balance for you between how much you want to sort of bring out or really showcase the instrument that you're playing on, and how much you want to stay true to the lute? I mean, do you factor in? Yeah, what is that like? I mean,
Probably, maybe the Bach is not the best example, but it's the one I'll run with, which is
oh no, give me a better example,
well,
happily.
maybe the Bach is a more interesting one though, even if it's not like the better. I mean, it's not a great example in the. It's not actually they're called lute suites, but this is sort of
Yeah.
just a cataloging error, and it's very likely that there were like more keyboard works than anything else, probably for the laut and clavier. A lot of them are like unplayable on the lute, which means that you sort of don't have to deal so much with this sort of issue of, how lutenistically do I want to approach this? Because actually, you can sort of sidestep it, right?
I see. Yeah.
But you're right. It is sort of an issue, and I think the guitar, or at least the guitar as it exists now, as opposed to like the Baroque guitar, is an instrument that forces you to confront this repertoire in quite a quite a contemporary way. I mean, the guitar has deficits of many things, right? We have a deficit not only of like repertoire, as we discussed. That's why we have to arrange so much. There's, by which I mean, good rep. There's a lot of rep, but there's a lot of it's bad as well. And we have a deficit of like projection and sustain and volume.
Hmm.
How do we deal with that? And I think I think these deficits demand that one fully exploits the tonal palette. And I mean, to think of Bream, I mean, he was somebody who really did that. And with him died an ideal of playing, not only a sort of figurehead. So only color basically can provide the impression that these things exist. And I think that
Yeah.
when one approaches Bach on the guitar, I think as much as that might seem iconoclastic, it is somehow the only solution, especially perhaps given the really demanding contrapuntal complexities that have to be
Yeah.
dealt with, right? I mean, color is sort of the only way to elucidate the individual lines against each other.
Interesting. I never thought about the guitar like that either. That with all of those deficits, what you really have to focus on, or not have to focus on, but what you have to work with is something like color. It's so interesting,
I mean, I
actually.
think it's like, yeah, it really does provide illusion, and like it's sort of like the opposite of the electric guitar, and perhaps like playing the electric guitar has like forced me to think of the classical guitar more in this sense, um, that like your the classical guitar is like always implying these things, right? But the electric guitar is really manifesting them. You're actually adding on these pedals and amplifiers and dialing up the volume, and etc. Right? So yeah, yeah, each instrument has its own strengths.
Yeah, yeah. The album that I wanted to talk about as well is this Soft Loud, which you recorded a few years ago as well. Is that right? And this is super interesting. It's very experimental. You shift between acoustic and electric guitar. You play the Steve Reich counterpoint and the Julia Wolf piece originally for nine bagpipes, and it's a super cool album. And I'm curious what your concept was for that album, or yeah, for that disc. How did you?
Sort of came up. I was brought by a mentor to a cafe, and he was like, I put you on this festival, and what do you want to do? And it was just after Trump and Brexit and these referendums had gone through, and I don't know, I was quite frustrated with what was going on. I was probably a bit hungover as well, and I was just super angry, and and so the two sides to the album, the first is largely made up of arrangements of Scottish lute manuscripts, which sort of sum up a very humble, beautiful, understated musical language, a sort of vernacular that seemingly in contemporary politics is really lacking. And also, these works are compilations of tunes from all over Europe. So the people who visited these noble Scottish houses would come with their musicians, but it just sort of demonstrates the political and historical realities, which is to say that like there are probably about 50 pieces in the Mammoth Balkaris manuscript from France, but there are only 7 or 8 from England. So it's and then also from far afield, it's like Portugal, Spain, Italy, Germany. So it's really demonstrating, how ancient this like Scottish European connection is, and actually how tenuous at that time, pre-Union of Crowns, the English relationship is. And so I don't know, these were pieces that I found very comforting over that period. And I just wanted to juxtapose them with something that worked, because they are super sweet. They're very, very lovely pieces. And I think, I've probably made clear my like frustrations with like too much overt unsleeved beauty, and so there's something needs to be placed alongside that to have an edge, and the electric guitar became that thing. So Steve Reich's sort of celebration of cosmopolitanism and multiculturalism in electric counterpoint with all the influences that come to it, despite recent social media issues cropping up there. Julia Wolf's Lad was this elegy for a close friend, yeah, originally for nine bagpipes. I like the idea also of playing this American music on like an American instrument, but like I'm Scottish, right?
Right.
Whereas like it was like before this American music played by American pipers on like Scottish instruments. There's sort of like this neat
Yes.
yeah. So I don't know, like soft loud, or soft hard, as my friends are calling it, was something like really that was really it became bizarrely quite tourable over the last couple of years, even in areas of the UK that were super pro-Brexit. And I think a lot of people just thought, this is really attractive because there's this weird guy playing two instruments, and like I think that sells out of novelty. But there sort of is a political like kind of context to it as well that demands a little, on stage elucidation. So it has actually upset quite a few audience, and there some tuts and like people leave and that kind of thing, which I think is quite right. It doesn't take much to be iconoclastic in classical music, but I think the power of art to confront things is something more empowering the more you sort of take it upon yourself to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it's something I was definitely curious to talk to you about, is how political you feel as an artist and how you kind of shape that role. Do you feel also like a social responsibility as an artist?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I was talking to a friend about it yesterday, and he was, I mean, I think it's fine not to do it. I think that art can play various roles, and sometimes you really are just demonstrating this the power of music to like spiritually heal and that kind of thing, and you don't want to have to be grappling with like climate change or something, like you sort of want a distraction from that. But the other, the extreme end of that is that art becomes this sort of soporific that dulls your senses to things, and it's just sort of a very purposeful distraction, right? I guess the only I just feel like if I wasn't somehow responding to something in some way, which I feel in every program I try to do, or I can't help myself but doing. If I didn't do that, it would feel like a sort of guilty abdication of some kind of responsibility. So I mean, I feel that drive, but it's also valid not to, with the caveat that like Ai Weiwei says, it's like all art is political whether you like it or not, right? And like stepping away from that is actually, you can say this is apolitical, but it has a sort of political result whether you like it or not, right?
For sure. Exactly. I mean, because it's personal, and in that sense, yeah, that's something I've talked with a lot of guests on the show about, is kind of what that question is, because I think being authentic can be also political, or everything is political ultimately. So, what is the movement of this specific time, like this Corona time, this time of silence and sometimes not silence, and what does that movement do for you? What have you been experiencing?
Oh, I just find it really hard. Like, say that, I've like been able to spend time working on myself and stuff. But, like as soon as Corona happened, it's just like I went back to my parents, and my sister did as well. And like, so we were in Scotland just absolutely caning whiskey for like a month and a half, which is just like, I mean, it's kind of fantastic, but it's also just awful. It's completely unsustainable, and you feel terrible, and you're like, not working. So like we snapped out of that pretty abruptly, and I'm not doing that anymore. Uh, I spent a lot of time playing the lute. I bought a Renaissance
Okay.
flute a while ago. And yeah, I mean, there were things to come out of it. Like there were certain pieces of music that I never really thought I'd want to work on, or certain types of music that I never thought I'd work on. Largely the super sweet guitar miniatures. So it was funny to find myself drawn to that at this point, whereas like previously in other more comfortable times I've felt more drawn to things that are like super disturbing. And yeah, so actually this is going to be coming out on my first album with Pentatone, is a lot of these comforting things, because I also thought, look, it's not only like I'm drawn to them now, but like what if I'm never drawn to them ever again? It's nice to sort of document this and have
Yes.
a step away from the endless morose meditations on loneliness that are seemingly incessantly coming out of this lockdown experience. We want something maybe more sweetly comforting at this time, or at least.
Yeah. Yes, I love that actually. Because it's so much, there's so much uncertainty, and we can't pretend that it's not there in the room, and we need comfort in that uncertainty. So, I'm curious about your process of commissioning composers, actually, which is something you've done quite a bit of. Is that fair
Yeah,
to
I
say?
mean, look, if Corona hadn't happened, I think there would be a lot more to talk about. There were 4 or 5 commissions that were supposed to
Okay.
come through, but they've all been, sort of delayed in one way or another. That just has meant that like I'm sort of not able to talk about most of it. So it's really irritating. Yeah.
Well, okay. So, for example, there's some there reading some of your past interviews. Um, I was fascinated by a couple of things. Yeah, sorry. I know. People always hate that too. They're like, "No, you read that. That was 2 years ago." Um, but something that really caught me was that you said that you want to explore more software-led sound structures, which are live and responsive to acoustic music. And that totally grabbed me. And I thought, what does he mean by that? And then it was like, are you fascinated? Are you fascinated by the world of tech?
Yeah, I
What's your
mean, I think it's very seductive, isn't it? I mean, like, especially with,
yeah,
classical musicians, we're always dealing with something not digital, right? And not manipulated, or largely that's where our training
largely.
is founded, right? Um,
Yeah.
I feel like it's where I began, and yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes working with composers, when you present them with all these digital possibilities, it is kind of an overload. It's sort of too much, and pieces can become a lot more about the tools rather than using the tools to create something. So I'm sort of I feel like I'm still learning how to judge these, like the introductions, but I think the introductions to the hardware, well, the digital hardware or the software or whatever. Like, as you can tell, I'm not a techie, um, but uh, but but what that means, I think, is that like the most rewarding and mature results to come from collaborations have really been the result of quite long-term relationships, and usually friendships, that have had the sort of ambient time necessary to explore those things in a really unrushed way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's kind of like wasn't it like Aristotle was talking about friendships, and he was talking about like the unstructured time that you needed to have like really full friendships. That like not like, okay, I'm making a like an hour appointment to meet you for a coffee, right? It's rather that or maybe it's just like with true friendships, I feel like you don't have that kind of set diarized time, right? You just go on a walk for hours and hours and
Yeah.
shoot the fact.
And also not imposed conversation as well. There's a lot of silence and a lot of, yeah,
Yeah,
not
it's like
lack of
dating, right? It's
structure.
like when it's a good date and it was like a bad date when you can tell it's like the quality of the silence.
Oh, that's true. That's very true. Yeah. So that's your that's your relationship with new music.
Hey.
Commissioning. No, I actually I really like the metaphor because, well, and the point that, I mean, I'm very much like this. I commission a lot of composers, and a lot of them are my friends, and specifically for that reason, because you have a relationship, and if we look at someone like Schubert, it was for him, music was about friendships, and so many composers were like this. So yeah, so it is a great metaphor, or rather, philosophy. I'm still curious about the tech thing on your end, but rather, I mean, but you're not yourself messing around with like hardware and sort of.
Yeah, and look, like when it comes to things like pedals and stuff, it's like these things are really expensive as well. See, there are
Oh yeah.
objective limitations to like what you can sort of explore. So when it comes to at least like arranging stuff, I'm really like trying to find the most efficient solution to this issue,
Okay.
which has been fine so far. It's been okay. I guess I sometimes think about my first producer, and he started the recording company with like 2 microphones.
Really?
Yeah, and the early records are still quite good, and I was like, wow, you really like. And now he's a very he's got so many more microphones, and he's like making really good records that win all sorts of awards and this kind of thing.
Yes.
But he was like, yeah, but if you begin with these limitations, you really understand how to use what you have at your disposal, because the worst thing is like a super elaborate setup that is like, I don't know, it's just saturated, isn't it? Like when you walk into a studio and you have like 30 microphones there and you're like, what, this is just going to sound like it's coming from everywhere.
Yeah. I mean yeah, exactly. It's kind of, we can capture the essence of it with the basics. And there's so much to learn in those basics as well. There's just in that simplicity. This reminds me of another quote that I read of yours, which I'm going to read out loud as well. Which is this, it's an article, an interview that you did in Presto Classical. And you're talking about Lawrence Dreyfus and how he was a big influence on you.
Oh, Larry, yeah.
And there's this cool quote where you said that something that he perhaps taught you the most was that you don't want to hold your cards close to your chest. Giving everything you have to give has its own rewards. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, Larry's just such a great human. He just really is so generous with everything that he knows. He's generous with all his time, and it's just. I always feel like when I'm reading his more academic writing, also you have this sense that it's not like some academic writing and. Some academic writing is so self-conscious, and it can be quite like domineering as well. And I always feel like Larry's is written with the most warm humanity, which is it's just super refreshing, I find, super rare. But I feel like when you give as much information as you feel you hold, then you're also forced into a situation where you have to like explore new things for yourself, right? So, yeah. I guess that's pretty much it, really.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense. It mean like in that. Can you kind of explain it again, a little bit, like, as in, if you're putting, yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't quite grasp it.
Well, I guess like if I feel like. If I owned like a tech company and like I then like made all the products that I made like open source and everybody had the blueprints, I'd want to create new stuff that I hadn't given away yet and understand different concepts. So I feel like it's pretty much that idea that you
Okay.
yeah
Yeah.
you're then pushed to discover new things
Yeah.
or new ideas or like. I mean, sometimes when you're teaching or something, also I feel like. You don't when you verbalize something, it's something that you've sort of just worked out there, but you don't realize it's been like underpinning your practice to that point, right? So it's in the same way that you write an essay, and an essay is not just the demonstration of like this knowledge that you've calculated in your head and you're just writing it down, right? It's also the process of learning more, right? You're executing an argument, but you're also developing it in real time, right? So yeah, I mean, I do feel like giving knowledge, as Larry does, leads to the accumulation of more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been totally lovely having you on the show and chatting with you. I would love to ask you the question that I like to always finish with, kind of hence the title of the show, which is this idea of revolution, evolution, and ask how can music, or how do you feel music can be revolutionary? And when has it been revolutionary for you?
I mean, I feel like it should always be revolutionary, you know, if it's like, if we're not doing something different or like, you know, yeah, I think we should aim to change the world with the interpretations that we put out there, right? I mean, like, absolutely, you know, like I was, it's the worst when you talk to somebody and they're just like thinking like super commercially sometimes, or they're, or like just kind of tired and cynical and like just burnt out from the oppression of capitalism on like an artistic system, and you're just like Jesus Christ, like when did like the curious child inside you die,
Yes.
it can be so depressing. And I think that like yeah, you can't afford to. I think all of these things are muscles, right? Like, and stagnancy, artistic stagnancy. If you let yourself get into that rut, it can be super hard to get out of it, right? So I think the only way to create interesting art is to aim for something absolutely ridiculous as the benchmark of like what you want to put out in terms of interpretations, right? So like yeah, of course, like I want to play music so well that it creates a political movement in itself, or like it really changes the world. It's like yeah, absolutely. I want to have laughable goals. Everybody should.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, I love that because yeah, otherwise, why would we do it? I
Right.
mean, yeah.
For the money, right? All the money that's out there for classical music.
Yes. Well, Sean, thank you so much for making time. It's nice to meet you. We're meeting for the first time today on Zoom, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
And wishing you all the best with the upcoming album recordings, which is happening in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And nice to have you here on the show.
Cheers.
And thanks everyone for tuning in, and see you next week.